Part 2, The Free Spirit, Aphorism 24. O Sancta Simplicus, what strange simplification and falsification mankind lives in! One can never cease to marvel once one has acquired eyes for this marvel. How are we made everything around us bright and free and easy and simple? How we have known how to bestow on our senses a passport to everything superficial, on our thoughts a divine desire for wanton gambling and false conclusions. How we have from the very beginning understood how to retain our ignorance so as to enjoy an almost inconceivable freedom, virility, impetuousness, bravery, cheerfulness, and life, so as to enjoy life. And only on this now firm and granite basis of ignorance has knowledge hitherto been able to rise up, the will to knowledge on the basis of a far more powerful will, the will to non-knowledge, to the uncertain, to the untrue. Now, is it not this antithesis, but as a refinement? For even if, here as elsewhere, language cannot get over its coarseness and continues to speak of antithesis where there are only degrees and many subtleties of graduation, even if likewise the incarnate tartuffery of morals which is now part of our invincible flesh and blood twists the words in the mouths even of us men of knowledge. Here and there we grasp that fact and laugh at how it is precisely the best knowledge that wants most to hold us in this simplified, altogether artificial, fabricated, falsified world. How it is willy-nilly in love with error, because as a living being it is in love with life. Aphorism 25. After so cheerful an exordium, a serious word would like to be heard. It addresses itself to the most serious. Take care, philosophers and friends of knowledge, and beware of martyrdom, of suffering for the sake of truth, even of defending yourselves. It spoils all the innocence and fine neutrality of your conscience. It makes you obstinate against rebuffs and red rags. It makes you stupid, brutal, and bullish. If in the struggle with danger, slander, suspicion, casting out and even grosser consequences of hostility, you finally even have to act as defenders of truth on earth, as if truth were so innocuous and inept a person she stood in need of defending. And precisely by you, you knights of the most powerful and most sorrowful countenance, you idlers and cobweb spinners of the spirit, after all, you know well enough that it cannot matter in the least whether precisely you are in the right, just as no philosopher hitherto has been in the right, and that a more praiseworthy veracity may lie in every little question mark placed after your favorite words and favorite theories, and occasionally after yourselves. Then, in all your solemn gesticulations and smart answers before courts and accusers, better to step aside, flee away, and conceal yourselves, and have your marks and subtleties, that you may be misunderstood, or feared a little. And do not forget the garden with golden trestle-work, and have about you people who are like a garden, or like music on the waters in the evening, when the day is already becoming a memory. Choose the good solitude, the free, wanton, easy solitude, which gives you, too, a right to remain in some sense good. How poisonous, how cunning, how bad every protracted war makes one when it cannot be waged with open force. How personal a protracted fear makes one, a protracted keeping watch for enemies, for possible enemies. These outcasts of society, long persecuted and sorely haunted, also the enforced clauses of Spinoza's and Gaudindio Bruno's, in the end always become refined vengeance seekers and brewers of poison, and even if they do so under the most spiritual masquerade, and perhaps without being themselves aware of it, just dig up the foundation of Spinoza's ethics and philology. Not to speak of the stupidity of moral indignation, which is in the philosopher an unfailing sign that he has lost his philosophical sense of humor. The martyrdom of the philosopher, his sacrifice for truth, brings to light what there has been in him an agitator and actor. And if one has hitherto regarded him only with artistic curiosity, in the case of many a philosopher, it is easy to understand the dangerous desire to see him for once in this degenerated into martyr, into stage and platform ranter. But if one does harbor such a desire, one has to be clear what it is what one will get to see. Merely a satyr play? Merely a farcical afterplay? Merely a continuing proof that the long tragedy has come to an end, supposing that every philosophy has in its inception a long tragedy. Welcome, everybody, to part 2 of Beyond Good and Evil. Part 1, a journey. Use a simple word for this, for part 1. A journey of him deciphering, criticizing, and eviscerating everything that was thought true, beautiful, and justified before him, and amid his time, and after his time. And with part 2, as the title inscribes, the free spirit, which is a complement to the subtitle of this work, a prelude to the philosophy of the future, aka the people after his time, and people after our time. It begins first with a Latin phrase, Sancta Simplistica. It translates holy innocence. And with this holy innocence, it's ironically in reference to another's naivety. He's correlating that naivety to the philosopher in this context and people among his time who harbor a sense of ignorance and pride, an inflated pride of what they marvel with their eyes, and with the concepts and this seeking of truth. So he's continuing with the criticism of truth, but involving language. He continues forward what strange simplification and falsification mankind lives in. In that sentence, he doesn't say it, but it involves the consciousness too. The conscious was developed. It's a late stage development, so it's still fragile till today. If our instincts didn't exist, we wouldn't survive. Thus, our instincts preserve our body, and we survive courtesy of the instincts. But with this falsification and simplification we live in today, he continues saying, no one can ever cease to marvel once one has acquired eyes for this marvel. Have we made everything around us bright, free, and easy, and simple? Because of this falsification and simplification, we've simplified. We've become some form of freedom, a bright euphoria, while easy. Replace the word easy with lazy, and it becomes a cohesive and understandable statement that he's saying. And with one can never seize the marvel once one has acquired eyes for this marvel. aka the philosopher. Another term for the philosopher would be a spectator of art. They can never cease to marvel once they have the eyes to marvel, because they can never sacrifice themselves nor gaze at nor perform the art from a distance and now gazing at this art that they performed, not solely in painting. This form of art is self-creation from the individual as a discharge of strength and a sign of their selfhood, from selfhood and power, inner wisdom, etc. That's the form of marvel that he's describing here, that the philosopher and the majority of people today can't acquire eyes for this marvel. But there's another perspective of they can't marvel at their ignorance or pride of seeking this truth as a true beautification of life among the realm of ideas. Everything below the realm of ideas is secondary. Hence, the revaluation of values, that the emptiest became the primary, and the primary artistic and realistic values in life became secondary. He continues forward, describing the holy innocence of this naivety of people. He would say, we have known how to bestow our senses a passport to everything superficial, aka pointless and hollow, on our thoughts and divine desire for wanton gambling and false conclusions, aka digging beyond rock bottom or ground zero, or continuing beyond the blockade of our knowledge and epistemology. That continues the prejudice and pride of philosophers, and outside of philosophers, with people who seek the self-cause of everything, till there's no explanation or description left that arrives at this cause. Continues forward, how we have from the very beginning understood how to retain our ignorance so as to enjoy an almost inconceivable freedom, virility, impetuousness, bravery, cheerfulness of life, so as to enjoy life. From this form of arrogance, as said itself, we have this indescribable or inconceivable enjoyment of freedom with the form of virility and impetuousness, aka moving back and forth quickly, and bravery and cheerfulness in life. You've heard the quote, "Ignorance is bliss." To a degree, being ignorant for a brief time is a form of bliss and separation or disassociation from everybody. But if you continue the philosophy of that of ignorance is bliss, it becomes that you're unambiguous and not approachable at the same time, pointless to discuss with. And he correlates what would people say ignorance is bliss. He didn't coin this word. Not word, but statement. What he's saying here as the inconceivable freedom, virility, because it's frivolous or pointless to be this ignorant, as a form of bravery, and to the highest degree, cheerful in life. And only with this new firm and granite basis of ignorance has knowledge hitherto been able to rise up the will to knowledge on the basis of a far more powerful will, the will to non-knowledge, to the uncertain, to the untrue. We've said this previously in part 1, that why not seek untruth, uncertainty, and non-knowledge? Everything outside your ignorant atmosphere or bubble of what you thought was true knowledge, aka being an indignant intellectual and dishonest with yourself while lying to yourself and others, which formulated a form of truth. which continues to operate in society today from indignation and dishonesty of the person who said they are knowledgeable, while not saying at the same time. Or some people who, I remember I was this too. I was an indignant person with knowledge at age 17 and 18. I thought I comprehended everything from history to science to astrology and astronomy to nonfiction literature, etc., etc. Fiction and nonfiction literature, etc., etc. I remember dates, events, and the pronunciation of words, and everyone's thinking, yeah, this guy's really smart. But 2-3 years later, at my age now, yes, I was intelligent, but I was obsessed with preserving that knowledge and not exercising the true wisdom and knowledge on my body. Because this is a great time to say. People today are walking encyclopedias. Colleges are factories for scholarship and to produce a scholarly, serious, disciplined, and rigorous schedule, while everything that's irrational is second to none. So, to people who are knowledgeable, I say to you, measure the wealth of your knowledge to the ability of your body. Can your body compete the same of how your mind functions? And Nietzsche says this almost the same thing in Aphorism 10 of part 1, where he's saying now the body is secondary for what is believed in more firmly today than the body, and thus with apparent good possess humor slip through their firmest possession. Who knows whether they are not at bottom trying to win back something that was formerly in even firmer possession, some part or another, the old domain of faith of former times. Because of these stronger and livelier thinkers who are desperate for life, with science and technology, because we're entering the fourth industrial revolution in human history, technology has slowed our metabolism or life, either biologically, psychologically, evolutionarily, because people say, oh, this is the final evolution of humankind. We will not go beyond this. If so, then why some humans don't have an inner muscle in their chest plus a tailbone, or what's left of a human tailbone, not a monkey tail, but a short bone for the tail. I say we're evolving, but at a hindering slow rate. But we digress. And if you read before this aphorism today, you can realize that he's saying the same thing that he said in the first 2 aphorisms of part 1. And he continues forward, not as its antithesis, but as a refinement. He's not opposing what is he's opposing, but it's not this antithesis to what is knowledge and non-knowledge, certain and uncertain, true and untrue, but it's a refinement or adaptation and interpretation. And to some, the opposite is the truth, where that what is truthful, knowledgeable, and certain is a form of refinement. Everything else is the antithesis and contrary or opposite of what I'm seeking. And that envelops ignorance plus the game of language. And he says it here too. For even if here as elsewhere language cannot get over its coarseness and continues to speak of antitheses where there are only degrees and matter of subtleties of graduation, even if likewise the incarnate contradiction or tartuffery of morals, which is now part of our invincible flesh and blood, twists the words in the mouths even of us men of knowledge. If you're familiar with George Orwell's 1984, doublespeak is doublespeak in political and outside of political terms is altering the social environment and conditions and the injuring and damaging of those environments and conditions by saying we'll get it all done, this is everything's pleasant, and I'll take care of this. So easing the tension and simplifying this cataclysm or catastrophe to a altruistic and two-face situation with polite and with polite words. That's double speak, and now Nietzsche is saying again with language, with the holy innocence or Santiplistica, this naivety of simplifying and falsifying, plus separating everything the two to create a coercion of one another. But this results in a contradiction of morals too. Separating the two and saying, this is evil, but that's good, so I'm going to go to that good and push that evil aside. That sounds to me utilitarian. What is practically useful and impractically not useful or dreadful. At the same time, it's how St. Paul revalued everything and deemed the morality of paganism of forcing one's will on others plus ambition became evil. That itself is a tartuffery or contradiction, because there's another will that you're seeking. It's spiritual will to power, aka another form of the will to power. To spoil everything. It continues forward. Here and there we grasp that fact and laugh at how it is precisely the best knowledge that wants most to hold us in this simplified, artificial, fabricated, falsified world, and how it willy-nilly in love with error because, as a living being, it is in love with life. This game of language loves life, loves to fabricate, simplify, and create an artificial view of how life is. Thus, this game of language is dependent on life. If you exclude life, the game is ceased to be. It stops. And vice versa. Not vice versa. If you exclude the language game, we'd have to continue this evolutionary chain of life till we can communicate in the form of language. That's what language is. The desire to communicate. Thoughts itself are they flux and fluid, while words are static and fixed. Say with the people who say the same statement every time, but in other words. Now that's adding flavor to what the statement is and the emotional environment and how you're teasing the psychology of people, but at the same time there's static and fixed words. You're creatively being fluid and playing with other people's emotions. And that slowly became how simplified, artificial this world has become. Not the world itself, the mentality. and thus they love this mentality. That's everything in Aphorism 24. Now with 25, the long one. As if 24 wasn't long, or every aphorism of Nietzsche. There's some short, some medium, and some long at the same time. It's Nietzsche. After so cheerful an exordium, aka a professional approach to a beginning of a proposition, that a serious word would like to be heard. Ooh, I wonder what would he be addressing here. Take care, philosophers and friends of knowledge, and beware of martyrdom, of suffering for the sake of truth, even of defending yourselves. It spoils all the innocence and fine neutrality of your conscience. It makes you obstinate against rebuffs and red rags, and makes you stupid, brutal, and bullish. If, in the struggle with danger, slander, suspicion, casting out and even grosser consequences of hostility, you finally even have an act of defenders of truth on earth, as if truth were so innocuous, innocent, and clumsy, a person she stood in need of defending. He's simply saying, and from reading this itself, he's saying just be cautious of how you approach these seekers of truth, these vengeful seekers of truth with their emotional hostility, because the second you begin sympathizing and empathizing, and to a degree pitying them, you become this stupid, brutal, and bullish person that struggles with slander, danger, and suspicion, aka reactionary, where you, and to a degree, resentment or ressentiment. There's two words, resentment and resentment. Resentment is the chronic emotion of jealousy, envy, and envy. With resentment, it slowly fades, and you won't remember it, depending on your memory. Resentment is the prolongation and continuing of that chronic emotion of envy and jealousy, but you can't act. Thus, you're powerless, and you attack in images and imagination in your mind how to perform vengeance. I'm staring at you, Justice. Justice is another name for vengeance today in the political, religious, ethical, and spiritual sense, depending on the spirituality and religion. How they see justice. So even defending yourselves, don't suffer for the sake of truth. AKA, this is unnecessary pain. You don't need this. Seek your... You'll receive... I'm paraphrasing, but you'll receive your why from seeking your how in your life. And to quote another great man, he said, you don't know where you're going when you don't know who you are. Plus, he's loving that these philosophers and friends of knowledge, aka the free spirits of the future, beware of being becoming a martyr in the eyes of people. He'll say this in the second half, that it'd say dangerous desire to see him for once in his degradation as a stage performer, or a stage and platform ranter, which he uses the word martyr for. Because these are actors that are performing on stage. And Socrates saw this too, where people just rant. The noble ancient Greeks, they ranted perpetually and unconditionally for the sake of ranting of what they'll do. And Socrates thought, okay, is that what you're going to do? But how are you going to do it? What is justice to you? Define justice. How would you do this? And people categorized. There's one person that categorized Nietzsche as a pre-post-Socratic and pre-post-modernist. You, the viewer, decipher that. Have a critical mind. Continues forward as if truth were so innocent and clumsy as a person that she needed to be stood in defending. Criticism of women or not, it's how you see it. He's using the male-female relationship dynamic again, and the philosopher and truth dynamic as is a relationship that's desirable. But because this truth and the defenders of this innocent and clumsy truth, that it falls between the fingers of their hands and is in desperation to be defended, as if you are the knight in shiny armor standing in front of your woman. That's a criticism itself to obsessive men, and vice versa with women. Now, you knights of the most sorrowful facial expressions or countenance, you idealers, you cobweb spinners of the spirit, after all, you know well enough that it cannot matter in the least whether precisely you are in the right, just as no philosopher hitherto has been in the right, that a more praiseworthy veracity may lie in every little question mark placed after your favorite word, theory, including yourself. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche's autobiography, he says that Beyond Good and Evil is his denial of modernity of science, theory, philosophy, art, and politics. And now, this is continuing his denial of these people with the question mark, or the person's lack of questioning themselves from their pride and the uncomfortableness of questioning yourself. Thus, the question mark behind every favorite word, theory, including yourselves, from all your solemn gesticulations or fast hand movements of acting and performing, and smart answers before courts and accusers. Knowledge can't preserve you. It can't spare you. Your intellectuality can't spare nor preserve you from these courtiers and accusers of who see you as a false person who's blowing smoke up your butt. It's either you humble yourself and injure your pride for your wisdom, for your folly to shine from your wisdom, etc., etc. aka laugh at your flaws. And you have mass and subtlety, so that you may be misunderstood or feared a little. And do not forget the garden. He's obsessed with this garden. A garden with golden trestle work, and have about you people who are like a garden, or like music on the waters in the evening, when the day is already becoming a memory. Choose the good solitude, the free, wanton, easy solitude, which gives you, too, a right to remain in some sense good. We arrive at Nietzsche's love of solitude. For the lack of solitude, the masses collectively deface an individual's individuality from the status quo. Their manipulation of language, there's the language game again, And trickery, um, tomfoolery and trickery words that they use to control you and seduce you in their world, their real world, while this apparent one is fake. But with inside solitude, he'll say this again. It's a brief time to breathe again. That's the etymology of the spirit, breath or breathing. So it's the free breath of this radical view of life that Nietzsche sees, while choosing the good solitude, the free, wanton, easy solitude. Time for self-development, a time for cultivating your inner self of unparalleled freedom and resolving mental issues that you have. I, for example, use solitude every day. The time I have solitude is the time I'm with myself. Everything outside myself is secondary, pointless, and an afterthought. Once I leave my solitude, see how fate faces me and how I'll respond to that fate. Continues with a 180 of how poisonous, how cunning, how bad of every protracted war makes one when it cannot be waged with open force. How personal a protracted fear makes one, how protracted keeping watch for enemies, for possible enemies. As he said earlier, that this ignorance, you're stupid, brutal, and bullish, or bull? Bullish, while slandering, suspicious, casting out everything that was hostile to you, and then finally acting as a defender of this truth on earth. He's correlating that to how the philosophers have plagiarized and reworded how truth is. Something poisonous now, cunning, and then have a firm grip of your enemies near to you, and then watching enemies as they strike. They form a paranoia or a schizo. While, at the same time, being feared a little, as he would say. He continues forward that these outcasts of society, long persuaded and sorely hunted, he includes Spinoza and Bruno's, in the ends always become refined vengeance seekers and brewers of poison, even if they do so under the most spiritual masquerade or mask wearers, and perhaps without being themselves aware of it. Just dig up the foundation of Spinoza's ethics and philology. Not philology. I almost said philology again. Theology. Because Spinoza correlated God and nature as one, hence monism. But it was a rebuking of Descartes' dualism of the mind-body, and that the mind is separate. Spinoza saying no. The mind and body are one. If so, that's why God and nature are one. Hence the monotheistic pantheism of Spinoza. Not to speak of stupidity of moral indignation, which is in the philosopher an unfailing sign that he has lost his philosophical sense of humor. Here's the including humor again in Nietzsche. He loves a great laugh. He loves the time of laughter, dancing, singing, awe, joy, and a time where instincts control you again. With the philosopher, the stupidity of moral indignation, or the indignant moral, or the indignant philosopher themselves, don't see the early sign that they're losing their sense of humor or sanity. Thus, they're this cunning, poisonous, cobweb spinning, inept person of the spirit who idealize this transient and beyond truth outside themselves. Continues forward that with this martyrdom, with the martyrdom of the philosopher, is them to sacrifice themselves for truth. This is similar to the I'll use a Latin term, sacrificum intellectum, or the third sacrifice to God, that Saint Ignatius Loyola said that this third sacrifice was for God's wisdom, knowledge, reverence, passion, or compassion and pity, and while sacrificing your selfish intellect for God. This is what the philosopher is. He's sacrificing himself for the truth. Brings to light what there has been in him an agitator, an actor, and if one has hitherto regarded him only with artistic curiosity, misstep on the end of people thinking that, curiously, that these people are artistic. They're wordy, but they're not performing art. They're spectating art from a distance and pinpointing every minute detail while not performing the irrational art of life, nor aligning themselves in their art of life because of how calculable and simple their lives are. In the case of many a philosopher, it is easy to understand the dangerous desire, as we said before, but if one does harbor a desire, one has to declare what it is one will get to see. Merely a satyr, aka a satyr is a half human, half goat play, merely a farcical afterpiece, meaning merely a continuing proof that the long tragedy has come to an end, supposing that every philosophy has in its inception a long tragedy. Nietzsche says in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, simplifying here, a rainbow is shown after prolonged and stormy days and nights. He's saying here that if one harbors to desire as to what is clear to them, it will one has to be clear what it is one will get to see as a form of satyr play, or merely a afterpiece of this prolongation of a tragedy that we're inside. Nietzsche would think of the modern structure as rubble up and rubble, or rabble up and rabble down, aka everything is decadent. They're preserving for energy. They're discharging the reactionary kind of energy, both inside themselves, from the physiological state of reality. Plus, what he's saying here of if you desire to harbor, and if you want to see what would really be shown to you, is to have a pathos of distance. Pathos is emotional, and distance is the separation. The emotional separation from people, liberating your will and breathing the fresh air again to see your progress in life. Because your life's not a bridge. Well, yes, your life's a bridge that continues forward with no goal. It's a continual and eternal becoming of you, which includes the first step of being, not a fixed and static being, but the form of a fluid, dynamic, overflowing, and alternating being in the form of becoming, because becoming includes being. It's a monistic where one complements the other. Appreciate everybody for hearing today's 2 aphorisms in the beginning journey of the free spirits. And he'll continue with the free spirit journey as we continue reading Nietzsche in part 2. There's a link in the description for the Men's Academy. I'm inside the academy. And remember, amor fati, love your fate.